In the autumn of 1903, workers excavating the eastern grounds of the Biltmore estate in Asheville, North Carolina, struck something they were not prepared for. It was not bedrock, it was not a natural formation. It was a structure, or what remained of one, sealed beneath 8 feet of compacted earth, enormous beyond anything the tools of the era could comfortably address. The foreman sent word to the main house. What came back was not an order to investigate. It was an order to stop, to document nothing, and to fill the pit back in. What they found that morning was never formally reported, but the men who were there did not forget, and the world they uncovered, even for those few hours, told a story far older than any history book had prepared them to understand. If this is the first time you are hearing about what lies beneath the most celebrated estate in American history, stay with us. Subscribe so you never miss what they keep trying to bury. The Biltmore estate was completed in 1895. George Washington Vanderbilt II commissioned it as a private residence on land he had been quietly assembling since 1888, purchasing over 100,000 acres of western North Carolina mountain terrain. The official story describes the estate as a monument to Gilded Age ambition, the largest privately owned home in the United States, a showcase of imported marble, hand-carved oak, and European artistry transplanted into the American wilderness. That is the story they have always told, but the land itself tells a different one. The Blue Ridge Mountains surrounding Asheville are among the oldest geological formations on Earth. The Cherokee who lived in this region for thousands of years did not consider the mountains to be empty. They spoke of the land as inhabited by presences older than memory, by beings whose size and power placed them outside ordinary human experience. When European settlers arrived, they encountered structures that did not match anything in their architectural vocabulary. Stone walls running for miles without mortar, flat platforms on hilltops too large and too perfectly leveled to be natural, chambers beneath the ground accessible through openings wide in ways that told you something about who made them. Vanderbilt purchased this land knowing something of what it contained. His acquisition strategy was unusual. Rather than buying the most developed parcels near Asheville, he systematically acquired the wilder tracts, the ridgelines, the hollows, the acreage that older families had avoided or passed over. His correspondence with landscape architect Frederick Law Olmsted, now housed in university archives, contains language historians have consistently described as poetic enthusiasm. I have to pause here for a second, because what I just described, that is one case from a much larger pattern. There are 35 documented cases in a document I put together. Different cities, different decades, different types of evidence. Every single one follows the same sequence: discovered, documented, acquired, disappeared. I could not fit all of it into a video. It's in the pinned comment below. Find it before we continue. That certain areas be left undisturbed during initial construction phases. Vanderbilt agreed. The construction of Biltmore House itself consumed the early part of the decade. Richard Morris Hunt designed a building of extraordinary ambition, 650 feet from end to end, 175,000 square feet of interior space, with a banquet hall rising to a ceiling over 70 feet high. These are celebrated dimensions. What is less discussed is the reasoning behind them. Hunt's original drawings, some of which survive in the Library of Congress, show early schematic proposals that were considerably more modest. The expansion to the final scale was not Hunt's initiative, but Vanderbilt's direct instruction. Among the surviving notes from their design meetings, there is a passage in which Vanderbilt speaks of the building needing to honor the proportions of the land itself. Historians read this as aesthetic philosophy. There is another way to read it. By 1893, the main house was sufficiently complete to begin occupancy. Though landscaping and outbuilding construction continued for years, it was in the context of this extended construction effort that the 1903 excavation occurred. The work order for that autumn specified drainage improvement in the eastern section of the formal gardens. The crew assigned to it was a subcontracted labour team from a firm in Charlotte, not the regular Biltmore groundskeeping staff. The use of outside labour for a routine drainage project was unusual enough that a long-time estate employee referenced it in a memoir published privately and circulated only among his family. He described it as a peculiar decision and noted that the Charlotte crew was brought in specifically because they had no prior knowledge of the grounds. What the crew found at approximately 4 feet of depth was a stone surface. Initial assessment was that they had hit a buried foundation remnant, not uncommon on old land. Excavation continued. The surface did not end. Horizontal exploration revealed it extending in multiple directions. Vertical probing along the edges showed that the stone continued downward in a formation consistent with a wall, not a floor. At approximately 6 feet, the wall face became fully visible, and what the foreman saw changed the nature of his report to the estate office. Before I go further, that document in the pinned comment. If you have not found it yet, go there now, because everything I cover in these videos is one piece of a pattern that only becomes visible when you see all 35 cases together. The document shows you the full pattern. What I can show you here is the surface. What is down there is everything underneath it. Pinned comment, now, then come back. A history project conducted in the 1960s described individual blocks that 3 grown men standing end to end could not span. The tooling on the stone faces was precise and regular, suggesting finished architecture rather than rough construction. And at one point in the excavation, an opening was encountered. Not a crack, not a collapse. A formed entrance or passage of a width the foreman described as broad enough to drive a wagon through standing upright. The estate office response came within hours. Work stopped. The crew was paid, given explicit instruction not to discuss what had been found, and released. Estate staff filled the excavation over 2 days. When it was finished, the ground was regraded and replanted, and the drainage project was marked complete in the estate records. No mention of the stone formation appears anywhere in the official archive. The only trace that survives is the foreman's family account and the detail noted by the long-time estate employee who found the use of outside labour strange. This is not an isolated pattern. It is the consistent pattern of the era. The period from roughly 1880 to 1910 saw an extraordinary concentration of large-scale construction across the eastern United States. Railroad expansion, urban development, and the building projects of the industrialist class all required extensive subsurface excavation. Across that period, accounts of anomalous underground discoveries appeared with remarkable frequency in regional newspapers and private correspondence, only to vanish from the official record. Chambers of unusual dimension, walls of impossible scale, passageways that descended beyond the reach of available light, objects incompatible with the known timeline of European presence in North America. The Smithsonian Institution, by the late 19th century established as the official custodian of American archaeological discovery, developed a protocol during this period for responding to reports of anomalous findings. The protocol was not designed to investigate. It was designed to absorb. Regional correspondents who reported unusual discoveries were contacted, thanked, and informed that the material would be properly handled. In many cases, objects were transferred to the institution. In many other cases, transfer was not possible because the objects were structural, embedded, too large to move. In those cases, the correspondence ends. The site is not mentioned again. The record closes. This is what happened at Biltmore. The underground formation encountered in 1903 was not the kind of thing that could be crated and shipped to Washington. It was the kind of thing that had to be decided about in place, and the decision, as it had been made at other sites across the country in other years, was to return it to the earth and proceed as though it had never been found. To understand why this decision was made consistently across different estates and different institutions and different decades, it is necessary to understand what these structures represent within the context of a history that has been almost entirely suppressed. The civilization that researchers have come to call Tartaria was not confined to Central Asia or Eastern Europe. The evidence indicates a global presence, a civilization of extraordinary technical capacity that existed prior to the historical record as it has been officially constructed, that built in stone at scales that remain unexplained by contemporary engineering, and that included in its population beings of physical dimensions that exceed the modern human norm by a factor that is not trivial. The skeletal record confirming this presence has been catalogued, contested, confiscated, and in many cases destroyed. But it persists. In county histories, in church records, in the private papers of farmers and physicians who encountered remains during ploughing and foundation work, and who wrote down what they saw because they had no reason not to. The western North Carolina mountains were not peripheral to this civilization, they were central to it. The Cherokee tradition of the Nunnehi, the immortal people who lived within the mountains, is not metaphor. It is cultural memory encoded in a form that could survive centuries of disruption. When the Cherokee describe beings of great size dwelling in the stone chambers of the Blue Ridge, they are preserving an account of cohabitation, of a period in which the land supported a population whose architecture is still beneath the soil, waiting to be encountered by anyone who digs in the right place. Vanderbilt knew enough of this to choose the land he chose. Whether his knowledge came from Cherokee informants, private scholarly sources, or the tradition of esoteric research fashionable among the industrialist class, is not possible to say with certainty. What is possible to say is that the land he assembled was not random, that the scale he built at was not accidental, and that when his workers found what was beneath the Eastern Gardens in 1903, the response was managed with a precision that implies preparedness. This was not the first time such a discovery had been handled. It was the continuation of a practice. The Biltmore estate today welcomes nearly 1.5 million visitors per year. Tours cover the house, the winery, the carriage roads, the designed landscapes. No tour covers the ground beneath. No interpretive panel acknowledges the 1903 excavation. The estate's official historical materials make no mention of anomalous findings at any point. The archive is maintained by the Estate Foundation, which controls access and has declined requests for comprehensive review of the pre-1910 correspondence files. What lies beneath those gardens is still there. Stone does not decompose. Structures built without mortar do not collapse under soil pressure the way mortared walls do. The passage encountered in 1903 remains intact, its entrance backfilled with the same soil that covered it for centuries before that autumn. The mountains around Asheville hold more of the same. The Cherokee knew this. The early settlers who built carefully around certain ridges and refused to dig in certain hollows knew this in a less articulated way. The tradition of knowledge about this land and what it contains is not entirely lost. It has simply been discouraged systematically and over a long period by institutions with a professional interest in the stability of the historical record as it has been established. That record is not stable. It is maintained. There is a difference. A stable record does not require active management. A maintained record requires constant effort to close the gaps, to absorb the anomalies, to ensure that what is found in the ground does not disturb what is written in the books. The pattern of discovery and suppression, repeated across the eastern United States from the 1870s through the early 20th century, is itself a form of evidence. You do not suppress what does not threaten. You do not bury what does not matter. They buried it again in 1903. The workers were paid and sent away. The foreman who described what he saw passed his account to his children, and they passed it further, because that is what people do when they witness something that refuses to fit the world they have been told they live in. The account survived because the truth of it was heavy enough to carry forward through generations, even without institutional support, even without official confirmation, even with the weight of the constructed record pressing against it. Beneath the eastern gardens of the Biltmore estate, under soil that has been tended and planted and walked over by millions of visitors across more than a century, there is a wall. The wall is part of something larger. The something larger is part of a civilization that history has not acknowledged. That civilization built at a scale that implies a physical reality incompatible with the story we have all been given about who was here before us and how long ago and what they were capable of. That is the story the ground is trying to tell. It has been waiting a long time for someone to listen.